We throw the word democracy around all the time. But what if I told you the people who actually invented it would find our modern system, well, completely bizarre? Forget everything you know about elections. We're about to dive into the truly surprising world of ancient Athens, where political power wasn't won by votes, but in a lottery.
Okay, just to get us started, let's play with a pretty wild idea. Imagine you get a letter in the mail one day. It says, "Congratulations, you've just won the lottery." But the prize isn't a pile of cash, it's a seat in Congress. And here's the kicker. Every single one of your fellow lawmakers, they were all chosen the exact same way.
Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds chaotic, right? A completely bonkers way to run a government. I mean, we've all been taught that elections are the purest, most essential form of democracy. Well, the ancient Athenians, the very people who gave us the word, would have told us we've got it all wrong.
So what did their version of rule by the many actually look like? Let's get into the fundamentals of Athenian democracy, because, trust me, the differences are pretty stark.
The contrast between their system and ours is just striking. Back in 5th century BC Athens, democracy was direct. Citizens made the big decisions themselves. They didn't elect other people to do it for them. Most government jobs were filled by a lottery, not an election. And maybe the biggest difference of all? Being involved in politics wasn't just a right, it was a fundamental duty.
So how in the world did this lottery system actually work? I mean, really. Let's break down the basic structure of their government to see how they pulled this off.
Okay, so their whole system really rested on three main pillars. First, you had the ecclesia. Think of it as this massive general assembly where any of the 30,000 eligible citizens could just show up, speak their mind, and vote. Then you had hundreds of jurors and magistrates handling all the legal stuff. But to keep it all from being total chaos, they had a super important steering committee, a council called the Boule.
And the Boule was a really big deal. We're talking 500 members, and their job was to set the entire agenda for that main assembly. So how did you get one of these crucial, powerful positions? You guessed it, they were chosen completely at random in a lottery from a pool of citizens who volunteered.
This whole process actually has a name. It's called sortition. And that's really the core idea we're digging into today. This concept of filling public office not by who you know or how much money you have, but by pure random chance from a group of citizens who put their hands up to serve.
And here's where it gets really mind-bending. For the Athenians, elections were not democratic. They actually saw them as aristocratic, which means rule by the best. They figured that elections would always favor the wealthy, the well-spoken, the popular, the powerful. So they only used voting for very specific, specialized roles that needed proven expertise, like military generals. For pretty much everything else, the lottery was the only truly democratic.
But this wasn't just some practical quirk, it was deeply philosophical. So why? Why did the Athenians believe so strongly that randomness, not choice, was the real secret to a good government?
You see, Athenian democracy wasn't born in a vacuum. It grew out of years of bitter conflict between the elite nobles. Sortition was their radical solution. It just shattered their grip on power and handed it over to ordinary citizens. By its very design, it made it impossible for a permanent ruling class to ever form. With random selection and really strict term limits, no one person or faction could ever get a long-term hold on power. It brilliantly turned being a citizen into a shared duty, not a career path.
Okay, but we have to put a huge asterisk next to this whole idea of rule by the many, because the Athenian definition of a citizen was incredibly narrow, and it's absolutely crucial we understand who was completely left out of this picture.
So when they said citizens, they were being very, very specific. Full citizenship, and with it, any say in the government, was completely denied to all women, to the entire enslaved population, and to all foreign residents. And of course, you had to be old enough to serve.
And, you know, when you add up all those excluded groups, the numbers are just jaw-dropping. The actual pool of eligible citizens was only somewhere between 10 and 20% of the total population. So, in reality, Athenian rule by the many was actually rule by a tiny, privileged minority of men.
And this system had some very powerful critics, even back then. Some of the greatest thinkers of the age, including Plato, were deeply skeptical. He famously called this kind of democracy anarchic and run by fools, basically an incompetent mob. So clearly, this whole debate over the wisdom of the crowd is nothing new.
Now, all of this might just seem like a fascinating, but kind of distant history lesson. But the core ideas and the problems that the Athenians were grappling with are surprisingly relevant to our own political struggles today.
I mean, just think about some of the biggest complaints we have about modern politics. People worry about the massive influence of money in elections, about the creation of a permanent class of professional politicians, about the growing gap between what those politicians want and what the people they're supposed to represent actually need. These are the exact problems the Athenians were trying to solve with their lottery system.
But here's the real kicker. This idea isn't just a historical artifact. The democratic principle of random selection is still very much alive in our world, often in places we don't even think about.
The most obvious example, of course, is jury duty, right? A group of randomly selected citizens is trusted with making huge, life-altering legal decisions. But the idea is also being used in new and really exciting ways, like in citizens' assemblies or deliberative polls, where random groups of people are brought together, educated on complex issues, and asked to provide real policy recommendations.
And this all brings us to one final, really provocative question for our own time. Could a wider revival of sortition, of choosing our leaders by lottery, actually create a more representative and effective government? Could it break the hold of big money and career politicians? Or is modern politics, like commanding an Athenian army, just too complex for anyone but an expert? The Athenians made their choice. The real question is, what should ours be? Thanks for exploring this with